Inside a tight renovation site, a worker drives a mini loader into a wall to remove it. The bucket catches, and the machine becomes unstable. A mini loader bucket should be treated as a material handling tool, not a demolition ram for elevated fixed structures. In a residential yard, a worker reaches the final stage of a sizable tree removal task. As the work finishes, the tree moves towards the nearby house area. Large, unevenly weighted tree sections should only be lowered in a tight clearance zone with dedicated directional rigging already in place. On a warehouse floor, a forklift takes a sharp turn at a speed, and the machine's weight shifts outside the intended control range. Operators must not execute a sharp, sweeping turn without significantly reducing travel speed first, regardless of whether the forklift is loaded or empty. At the top of a residential stairwell, someone tries removing a chandelier while standing on an A-frame ladder that clearly isn't set up properly for the stairs below. One small shift here, and the entire setup could go sideways fast. Ladders should never be used on uneven stair surfaces unless they're properly stabilized with the right equipment. Deep in a rural logging site, a routine powered saw cut becomes an important safety training example when the large log unexpectedly separates beneath a worker's feet. Stepping onto freshly cut unsecured timber while operating powered cutting equipment introduces an immediate and significant stability concern. Outside a home, a worker pushes a heavily loaded wheelbarrow up a steep metal ramp. But as the cart begins to lose momentum, gravity pulls the heavy load backward. Pushing top-heavy cargo up a steep incline creates a serious momentum control hazard. Workers must utilize mechanical lifting aids when transporting heavy materials up steep inclines. At a delivery area, a worker rides on an elevated stack of wooden planks, unaware that one sudden forklift movement can shift the entire load surface beneath him. Riding on unsecured stacked materials lifted by a forklift places the work position on an unstable surface with no reliable control. Behind a busy pub counter, a worker walks while focused on his phone. He steps into an open cellar hatch outside his line of sight. Any floor hatch or lower-level access point that is left open should immediately be protected with a rigid high-visibility barricade or a dedicated spotter. Never navigate an active workspace while focused on a mobile device. Your situational awareness is your first defense against lower-level opening hazards. On a busy warehouse floor, workers try to push a tall, top-heavy battery cart. It quickly becomes unbalanced under its own weight. Manually handling narrow, top-heavy industrial equipment without proper mechanical aids greatly increases the chance of sideways stability loss. Always wear certified steel-toe boots in material handling areas to create a rigid protective barrier against equipment contact risks. Assess the load stability before moving it. At a dirt extraction site, a loaded cement truck reverses onto a heap of sand, and the ground support conditions change in a way that affects vehicle stability. Operators must not reverse a high center load near uncompacted slopes, loose ground, or soft shoulders without a verified route and an active spotter. The concentrated pressure of the rear tires can quickly weaken loose earth, creating an elevated vehicle stability concern when the ground can no longer support the vehicle's weight in a stable and predictable way. Always walk and inspect your path before backing up. Keep heavy equipment strictly on compacted, designated ground. Inside a busy workshop, a worker tries to hold a growing stack of heavy wooden panels in place by hand. As more weight is added, the stack becomes harder to control. Using human strength to stabilize vertically stacked, heavy materials during the loading process creates a serious material control and pinch point hazard. As panels are continuously added, the shifting center of gravity and accumulating mass can rapidly exceed physical limits, leading to unexpected material movement or loss of proper material control. Always use engineered A-frame carts, heavy-duty clamps, or permanent racking systems to physically secure panels as they are being loaded. Materials should also be stored at a safe, mechanically supported angle, completely eliminating the uncontrolled practice of requiring workers to manually balance heavy loads by hand. At a residential construction site, a large excavator being transported on a flatbed truck unexpectedly shifts its weight, causing it to move off the trailer, rotating an excavator cab while it is positioned on a narrow transport trailer introduces a significant balance issue. The rear counterweight greatly alters the machine's balance point the moment it swings away from the center line. This sudden off-axis momentum can exceed the stability limits of the tracks, quickly transforming the equipment into an unstable machine movement concern. Operators must maintain perfect cab alignment with the trailer bed during the entire unloading sequence. During pipeline construction, a laborer climbs into an unlined trench, unaware that the soil around him may already be close to failure. Unshored trenches are among the most unpredictable hazards in construction. As depth increases, soil pressure builds rapidly, and without proper reinforcement, the walls can collapse with little or no warning. That's why any deep excavation must be properly protected using trench boxes, shoring systems, or approved benching methods. Conditions also need constant monitoring because soil can shift long before any visible signs appear. On a steep hillside roadway, a driver moves a utility truck across the incline, unaware that the slope is already working against the vehicle's balance. Driving across a steep slope places the full weight of the vehicle against its own center of balance. As the truck moves sideways along the incline, gravity begins pulling the upper weight downhill while the tires work to maintain grip. Drivers should move heavy vehicles straight up or straight down steep slopes whenever possible, instead of cutting across the angle. Also, operators must check the terrain, grade, surface condition, and vehicle limits before committing heavy equipment to uneven ground. At a roadside work zone, a boom truck lifts a mini excavator while a worker stands below. The rigging loses alignment, and the load shifts out of position. The safe position around a hoisted load is always completely outside its suspended path. Standing beneath lifted machinery means relying entirely on the consistent performance of lifting straps, turning a simple mechanical issue into an immediate high-contact risk situation with little room to react safely. Always establish a strict, barricaded exclusion zone around any lifting operation before the load leaves the ground. Never rely on a rigging setup remaining stable throughout the lift. Stay completely clear of the load zone until the equipment is safely set down and secured. On a rural curve, a tractor pulls into the road. At that moment, another speeding vehicle appears over the hill with limited reaction space. Entering a public roadway from a hidden access point or limited visibility curve should only happen after verifying a completely clear line of sight in all directions. Pulling slow-moving, heavy agricultural equipment into an active traffic lane without absolute clearance creates a traffic safety risk, leaving approaching drivers with limited reaction time to respond to a traffic situation. Always use a dedicated spotter or install convex mirrors when exiting blind driveways. In a narrow warehouse aisle, a loaded forklift contacts a rack base, affecting the connected storage system and creating a clear structural stability concern. Workers must not maneuver a forklift through tight storage aisles without absolute certainty of the load's width, fork position, and ground-level clearance. Contact with a critical structural upright can compromise the integrity of the racking system, turning stored materials into a meaningful rack stability concern that can affect equipment, inventory, and workers in the surrounding area. Always maintain a strict buffer zone between your equipment and structural supports. On a residential street, a moving tank trailer approaches low utility lines with a worker placed in an unsafe elevated position on top of the load. A worker should not be placed in an elevated position on moving equipment to attempt line clearance work by hand. The unpredictable tension and weight of suspended cables can exceed a worker's ability to maintain balance, causing a stability issue on the vehicle and creating a major work-at-height hazard. Conduct a route survey before moving oversized equipment and coordinate with utility crews or trained bucket truck operators for any overhead line clearance work. Workers should not stand on moving equipment or materials. At a busy transport yard, a worker unlatches a flatbed truck's shipping container, unaware that the shifted cargo is pressing against the doors and ready to move outward. Opening a sealed transport unit without first confirming internal load stability exposes personnel to a significant movement path and load release concern. Freight shifting during transit creates strong pressure against the rear doors. This hidden force turns the exterior locking mechanism into a key release point, pushing unstable boxes outward the second the seal breaks. Personnel must always cautiously crack the doors slightly and position themselves behind the solid steel frame to assess contents safely. On a busy roadside, a person filming with a phone steps backward without checking the space behind them, moving toward the open path of nearby traffic. Using mobile devices near active roadways creates a serious distraction hazard. When attention locks onto a phone screen, awareness of the surrounding environment drops fast. That tunnel vision can prevent someone from noticing traffic movement, turning a small lapse in focus into a serious roadway exposure risk. Pedestrians must always stay fully aware near active traffic. Phones should only be used in secure pedestrian areas, well away from moving vehicles. Before stepping backward, always check the area behind you and make sure the path is completely clear. Inside a warehouse, a worker operates an electric pallet jack carrying a loaded pallet, unaware that the stacked cargo is not properly positioned. If the goods on the pallet are not evenly stacked or properly secured, the center of gravity can shift during movement. Even normal steering or slight floor unevenness can cause the load to tilt further, making the upper layers lean progressively. Once the stack begins to shift, the instability can increase quickly, reducing the operator's ability to correct it while the pallet is elevated. Operators should always verify that loads are properly centered and secured before moving elevated pallets. Facilities must enforce correct stacking practices, ensure stable load distribution, and require checks before transporting lifted freight through warehouse aisles. Inside a convenience store, a shopkeeper stands beside a fully loaded display fridge. The entire unit begins tipping forward over the counter. Tall, fully loaded commercial appliances belong on a secure anchoring system when placed in a retail environment. Minor vibrations, uneven flooring, or shifting internal inventory can quickly reduce the stability of these massive units, resulting in a rapid tip-over event with little time for anyone standing in the immediate area to move clear. Always secure heavy display refrigerators and freestanding coolers to a structural wall or floor using heavy-duty anti-tip brackets. Inside a narrow warehouse aisle, a forklift makes contact with a loaded rack. The contact leads to storage rack movement across the system. Operating heavy machinery in tightly packed storage aisles leaves very little room for error, as towering industrial racks are highly vulnerable to lateral contact. A small bump from a heavy forklift can quickly affect a critical support column, weakening the structural grid and initiating a rack stability problem that can displace stored inventory across the aisle. Always maintain a deliberate, controlled speed and strict spatial awareness when navigating congested inventory zones. Protect vulnerable racking structures with heavy-duty column guards or base bollards to absorb accidental mechanical contact before it can create a larger rack stability concern. On a factory floor, a worker steps inside an automated enclosure before energy isolation is verified, creating a machinery control exposure. Workers must not enter a robotic cell or enclosed machinery zone without physically isolating the energy source and applying strict lockout-tagout protocols. Relying on an open door, a temporary pause, or an inactive moment to hold back an automated system places the worker inside an active machine control area where unplanned movement could occur because of a sensor fault, control error, or unplanned manual reset. Always shut off power at the source before crossing the threshold. Never trust an automated machine to simply remain paused while you're inside. In an outdoor repair bay, a trained mechanic demonstrates why you should never block the exhaust outlet of a running sedan. Blocking an active tailpipe with a makeshift plug creates an unsafe pressure condition. As the engine continues to run, exhaust flow can be restricted behind the blockage until it releases unpredictably past the obstruction, redirecting exhaust discharge, exhaust byproducts, and loose material into the work area near the operator's position. Always use proper diagnostic gauges to test exhaust pressure instead of improvising with shop rags. Treat every active tailpipe as a directional discharge point and keep yourself completely outside the exhaust path. At an elevated construction site, two workers balance on a crane boom with a very limited safe walking surface, creating a serious elevated access hazard. The narrow, unguarded boom of a crane or exposed structural steel should not be used as a walking path or makeshift bridge. Even with personal fall protection in place, traversing slick, angled metal at a significant height creates an elevated access hazard, where the resulting support condition requires a documented retrieval plan. Always utilize engineered aerial lifts, secure scaffolding, or temporary catwalks to safely access elevated work zones instead of using machinery or exposed structural members as an access route. At a busy loading dock, a routine delivery didn't go as planned when a large crate unexpectedly shifted and placed a worker within the load's movement path. Moving top-heavy, unsecured loads across elevated or angled surfaces introduces a significant tip-over. Concern: when gravity shifts, the unbalanced weight can quickly exceed a single worker's control capacity, creating a major contact zone and load path situation that is difficult to manage safely. Workers must always use specialized dollies or pallet jacks to secure and stabilize large items before transport. Working in pairs during unloading operations ensures vital load control and helps prevent major imbalances. If a large object begins to tip, personnel must immediately step clear of the load path. At a snowy loading dock, a spotter guides a reversing truck while standing too close to the narrowing space between the trailer and the dock. The safest spotter is one who can direct movement without entering the vehicle's path. Around loading docks, visibility is limited, engines can mask warning sounds, and gaps can close faster than expected. Once space tightens, there's often little time to react. Spotters should always guide from a clear, visible position with open space around them. Drivers should stop immediately if they lose sight of the spotter. Safe backing depends on clear communication, proper positioning, and never standing in the truck's path. At an open industrial transport yard, a mechanic works near a heavy dump truck tire, unaware that the pressurized assembly may release its stored energy without warning. Large commercial tires hold a tremendous amount of air pressure, and that pressure must be treated with full respect during inflation or inspection. If a rim, sidewall, or locking component fails, stored pressure can project air, rubber, and metal components across the service area with serious force. Mechanics should use reinforced inflation cages or approved restraint systems when working with heavy commercial tires. Personnel must remain outside the sidewall release path, use remote inflation equipment when available, and check rims, locking rings, and tire condition before applying pressure. On a factory floor, a worker reaches into an active industrial press. The machine reactivates, bringing his hand closer to the moving area. Machine guards and full energy isolation are essential anytime a worker enters the point of operation on powered equipment. Attempting to clear a jam or make a quick adjustment on a live machine turns a momentary shortcut into an immediate high machine contact risk the second the system re-engages. Always execute strict lockout-tagout procedures to completely isolate power before entering a machine's internal moving area. Never trust a temporarily paused machine. If the power is still connected, the equipment can reactivate or cycle again without notice. Inside a tight workshop, a worker climbs an unsecured ladder near an open floor area. It shifts out of position beneath him. An A-frame stepladder should only be climbed after verifying that the spreaders are fully locked and all 4 feet are planted squarely on. Stable, level ground. Scaling an unbalanced ladder in a confined space turns a routine task into an unstable, elevated work position, affecting your balance the second the frame shifts out of alignment. Always inspect your ladder's footing and strictly lock the hinges before stepping off the ground. An overhead beam should not be used as a substitute for 3 points of contact on the ladder itself. If your base isn't completely secure, a balance issue can occur quickly. Inside a storage facility, a stand-up forklift drives through a doorway with its mast raised, and the overhead frame contacts the steel structure. Operators must not travel with a forklift mast elevated, especially when navigating through doorways, aisles, or areas with overhead obstructions. Driving with a raised mast shifts the machine's center of gravity and creates a clear snag concern. When the mast contacts an unyielding overhead structure, forward momentum can turn the contact point into a pivot, creating an equipment stability concern and placing the operator in a higher risk operating area. Always drop your forks and fully retract the mast before putting the machine in motion. Know your overhead clearances and visually verify every threshold before crossing. In a busy loading yard, a tarp pull from a loaded flatbed creates an unsafe edge positioning condition. Workers should stay away from the unguarded edge of an elevated flatbed truck when materials are being manually handled while a forklift is moving the load. The unpredictable pulling force of heavy machinery can exceed a worker's ability to maintain control, turning a minor footing issue into a balance issue at height before stability can be regained. On a busy city street, a hydraulic excavator begins dismantling an old building, but the unstable structure unexpectedly gives way outward. Conducting heavy demolition near active public roadways without establishing a large exclusion zone introduces important site control concerns. The uncontrolled release of structural tension causes concrete to break apart unpredictably, transforming moving debris into fast-moving movement path concerns that can affect passing vehicles and place nearby pedestrians inside the affected area. Project managers must mandate strict road closures and utilize heavy-duty protective netting before structural dismantling begins. Operating heavy machinery to bring down walls requires a substantial buffer zone calculated for the worst-case structural movement scenario. At a transport yard, a driver steps into his cab as a freight truck ahead starts rolling backward into the narrow space between them. Large freight vehicles have wide blind spots, and the area directly behind them can disappear completely from view. When trucks are parked close together, even a slow reverse can quickly close gaps and leave almost no room to react. Before reversing, drivers should always confirm the full area behind the vehicle, especially in congested yards. At a busy shipping terminal, a worker unlatches a transport container, unaware that a moving truck cab is entering the rear clearance area. Working in a tight active vehicle corridor leaves very limited clearance when one vehicle begins moving unexpectedly. A truck cab carries enormous momentum even at low speed, and the space between vehicles can be reduced much faster than the work area allows. Any task performed near trailers, doors, and active vehicles must be planned, so workers always have a visible position and an open route away from moving equipment. Deep inside a well, two workers stand on an unsupported ledge while laying bricks. The working surface loses support beneath them. Work inside a trench, shaft, or well depends on engineered support systems rather than the apparent stability of earth or narrow ledges. The structural integrity of unreinforced soil is unpredictable, and working on an unstable base inside a confined space turns an unexpected loss of support into a major confinement hazard. Always use engineered shoring, shielding, or sloping techniques before entering any excavation or deep well. Never rely on the apparent stability of dirt or loose masonry. Always wear a secured safety harness tied off to a secure anchor point above ground. On a recycling facility floor, workers walk with their backs to active travel lanes while a forklift moves forward with its view obstructed. A forklift should not be driven forward when the payload obscures the operator's line of sight. Moving heavy equipment with limited visibility through a shared workspace creates a reduced visibility movement area, limiting the operator's reaction time and leaving unaware pedestrians unable to respond safely to an equipment contact risk. Always drive in reverse when carrying an oversized load to maintain absolute visibility of your travel path. Foot traffic should not be mixed with heavy machinery. Always establish strictly enforced barricaded pedestrian walkways to physically separate workers from mobile equipment. In a narrow outdoor alleyway, a worker uses an angle grinder to cut through a metal structure, creating a clear tool control concern. Operators must not use an angle grinder without its factory-issued safety guard and a firm, two-handed grip. When an abrasive wheel binds inside a tight cut, the rotational force can cause unexpected tool movement toward the operator's workspace, reducing control and increasing the possibility of losing safe tool clearance. Always position yourself outside the direct line of the tool's movement and let the cutting wheel do the work without forcing the angle. On a sloped forest hillside, a tree begins to move, while the crew remains too close to the active work area. Once a tree operation has begun, the stump area should be cleared immediately. A heavy trunk on an incline can move unpredictably, shift off its support point, or change direction with significant force, creating a controlled exclusion zone hazard for anyone positioned within the immediate work area. Inside an industrial pipe factory, a routine loading task becomes an urgent safety control situation when moving rotating equipment pulls material toward the active machinery area. Reaching across or standing too close to operating, unguarded rotating machinery exposes workers to immediate machine contact and material control concerns. Loose clothing, hair, or even a momentary loss of balance can allow high torque components to grip material and continuously pull it toward contact point areas, turning a standard operational process into an important machine safety situation. Maintaining a strict, safe distance from all moving parts is the first line of defense against sudden machine contact concerns. Operating any industrial equipment without proper machine guarding in place creates an unacceptable hazard, as these shields are essential for preventing accidental contact. At a confined construction site, a worker stands beneath a suspended crane bin as the rigging above quietly carries the full weight of the lift. Anytime material is hanging overhead, the space below can change from a routine work area to high-risk exposure in an instant. A small rigging issue, strap shift, or lifting imbalance can send the load out of controlled movement before anyone below has enough time to react. Workers must consistently keep clear of all active hoisting areas while loads are suspended. Spotters should maintain constant visual monitoring so no one walks beneath or near the load path during the lift. Every strap, hook, shackle, and rigging connection must be inspected carefully before the crane begins moving material. At an auto garage, a driver lines up a white sedan over a service area, unaware that a sudden press on the accelerator can send the vehicle forward. In confined workshop spaces, even a small throttle input can create immediate forward motion. When a vehicle is already positioned in a tight bay, unintended acceleration or pedal misapplication can quickly turn a controlled alignment task into a rapid vehicle movement. Because the area around the crossing is often used by pedestrians, there may be very little reaction time or space to avoid a moving vehicle. In such environments, precise pedal control and full awareness of nearby personnel are critical to prevent sudden impact incidents. On a roadside, a worker climbs a narrow plank with a heavy load on his head. He loses balance beside passing traffic. A narrow, unsecured wooden board beside live traffic is not a safe loading ramp under any circumstances. Balancing a heavy, overhead load on an unstable, narrow surface compromises your center of gravity, turning a minor misstep into a significant fall and traffic side exposure hazard. Always use wide, secured, and slip-resistant commercial loading ramps when transferring heavy freight. Never compromise your balance for a quick shortcut. One wrong step on a makeshift bridge can quickly expose you to nearby traffic risk. In a rural yard, a worker cuts through a sizable tree. A pickup sits just feet away inside the planned work area. Parking a vehicle inside the active clearance zone of a felling operation creates an uncontrolled area for moving material. A simple miscalculation in the hinge cut can quickly redirect the weight of the trunk, creating avoidable equipment damage during what should be a controlled yard cleanup task. Always clear a wide perimeter and move all vehicles well beyond the tree's maximum clearance radius before starting any cutting work. A truck bed should not be treated as a convenient landing area for timber. Gravity and wood movement can create costly damage for anything left in their path. At a work site, dismantling area, a saw cut affects the support area near a worker's position beside a trench edge, creating an avoidable elevated position concern. Workers must not support their weight on the exact structural element they are actively dismantling. When the final load-bearing connection is separated, the material can quickly lose structural integrity, turning a routine cut into an elevated position concern while the worker is still handling powered equipment. Always analyze the load path and establish a secure, independent stance on solid ground before engaging your saw. Isolate your balance from the work zone, maintain total control of your equipment, and keep your site safe. In a shipping container terminal, a reach stacker moves forward with a worker positioned in an area that may not be visible to the operator. Walking with your back to active heavy machinery in a busy shipping yard should be avoided unless positive eye contact with the operator has already been established. The enormous blind spots on a reach stacker mean that if a person is walking directly in its travel path, the operator may not see them, turning a momentary lapse in situational awareness into a serious equipment interface hazard. Always use designated, physically separated pedestrian walkways when navigating a container terminal. Continuous 360-degree situational awareness must be maintained, and clear two-way visual communication with any reach stacker operator should be established before crossing or entering an operational zone. Inside a warehouse, a large, unsecured industrial fan suddenly moves forward after being switched on. Operating high-velocity ventilation equipment without floor anchoring transforms it into a major mobile equipment risk. The aerodynamic thrust from oversized blades creates a powerful self-propelling force, capable of moving heavy steel frames across concrete floors and creating a serious clearance zone concern for anyone in its path. Managers must permanently bolt large ventilation units to the floor or use heavy-duty chocks to prevent unintended migration. Workers must always verify locking mechanisms on portable machinery before activation, guaranteeing the unit cannot crawl under its own power. Establishing a mandatory clear zone around these fans provides a vital safety buffer, keeping personnel far from the unsafe movement radius. On a dirt road, a worker moves toward a rapidly spinning excavator cab as the cab rotates. A rotating excavator does not provide a safe place for a person to step in and regain control by hand. Once the cab starts spinning, the weight and speed of the machine create a powerful sweeping motion around the equipment. That movement can overpower balance, timing, and reaction speed, making any manual attempt to board or stop the machine extremely unsafe. Personnel must move away from the rotational path of uncontrolled machinery immediately. Personal safety should always come before trying to stop moving equipment by hand. Operators and crews should rely on emergency shutoff systems, remote controls, or trained response procedures whenever equipment loses normal control. In a loading area, a worker inside a utility truck receives a tall metal cabinet, unaware that the freight is already leaning beyond a safe balance point. Receiving tall, top-heavy items inside a truck bed creates very limited room for correction once the load begins to tip. A metal cabinet carries most of its weight high above the floor, so a small tilt can quickly move the center of gravity beyond the base. The sidewalls of the truck also restrict movement, leaving very little space to reposition the load safely. Manual handling becomes especially risky when the item is large, rigid, and difficult to control from below. Personnel should use lift gates, forklifts, pallet jacks, or other mechanical support when loading oversized inventory. In a repair yard, a worker strikes a seized hydraulic part with a sledgehammer. The pressurized component releases stored pressure under load. Pressurized components require a full depressurization process before any disassembly or force is applied. Applying concussive shock to an active pressure vessel compromises its structural integrity, quickly transforming trapped mechanical energy into an uncontrolled pressure release event that can create widespread flying material exposure across the workspace. In a snow-covered timber yard, a forklift pulls from an unstable log pile. The stack shifts out of position and moves toward the equipment. Materials should not be pulled from the bottom or middle of a large freestanding stockpile. Undermining a large stack of loose cylindrical materials quickly weakens its structural integrity, triggering unexpected material movement that can affect any machinery positioned in the material movement path. Always build stockpiles using proper terracing techniques, structural bunks, or retaining racks to securely contain the materials. Piled loads should not be undercut. Always dismantle stacks deliberately from the top down to reduce the risk of unmanaged material movement. In a building lobby, workers try to guide a heavy cable reel downstairs, but the reel becomes difficult to control once its rolling momentum increases. Workers must not rely on human strength alone to manually lower a heavy cylindrical load down a stairwell without a secure mechanical winch or rigging system. A slight shift in balance can transfer control away from the crew, allowing the object's rolling momentum to exceed manual handling limits and create a meaningful contact and property impact concern. Always utilize freight elevators, certified hoists, or engineered ramps to transport massive spools across elevation changes. Respect the powerful physics of heavy rolling loads and do not rely on manual force alone to control them. Outside a roadside lumberyard, a forklift carries long beams across an active traffic lane. The overhanging load poses a serious traffic hazard to approaching road users. Long, overhanging materials should not be transported across an active public roadway without a fully secured traffic control zone. Extending unmarked construction materials into a live lane creates a difficult-to-detect elevated obstruction for approaching motorists, creating a serious traffic interface hazard before they clearly recognize the condition. Always deploy a dedicated spotter equipped with high visibility signs or flags to halt oncoming traffic completely before moving heavy equipment into the street. Bright warning markers should also be attached directly to the furthest ends of any overhanging load. At a river bridge demolition site, an excavator hammers into the stone arch, triggering a major loss of structural support that causes the machine to move downward. Positioning heavy equipment directly atop the exact structure being dismantled creates a significant support loss concern. As the hydraulic breaker removes essential load-bearing supports, the suddenly weakened foundation can no longer sustain the machinery tonnage. This high-risk operational miscalculation creates an immediate and important ground support failure risk. Operators must always station their machinery on solid, undisturbed ground adjacent to the active demolition zone. Conducting a thorough engineering assessment beforehand is strictly required to determine a safe removal sequence. At a construction site, a worker balances on narrow concrete formwork and kicks at a wooden frame while standing close to an elevated edge. Forceful movement on a narrow surface can remove stability faster than the worker expects. When a strong kick or push is made from an unprotected ledge, the body's weight can shift beyond the small support area underfoot. Workers must use stable scaffolding or properly rated work platforms before applying force to elevated materials. Fall protection systems should be properly anchored whenever work is performed near open edges or temporary framing. Heavy panels, frames, or stuck materials should be removed with controlled tools and safe positioning, not sudden force from an unstable stance. In a tire warehouse, a worker pushes a stack of commercial tires forward, unaware that the movement can destabilize the column positioned nearby. Tall stacks of heavy tires can affect one another when they are stored closely together. When one column is moved or lowered without control, the movement can transfer force through the floor and into nearby stacks. If those stacks are not braced or separated, the vibration and shifting weight can cause another column to lean out of position. Facilities should use mechanical lift trucks or controlled handling methods to break down tall inventory stacks. Personnel must check surrounding materials before moving one column, keep clear of adjacent stacks, and avoid working where nearby freight could shift unexpectedly. In a residential yard, a worker runs toward a rolling utility trailer, unaware that a pickup truck has lost control and is beginning to roll backward into the same rear clearance area. In a yard, a worker cuts a large tree limb while standing on a ladder. The branch shifts and disrupts his balance. Elevated tree work calls for a stable aerial platform or a certified climbing system, not an unanchored extension ladder. The release of tension causes unpredictable rebound and major weight shifts, quickly turning a standard cut into a high-movement instability hazard that can easily destabilize a worker on elevated footing. Always utilize a stable aerial lift platform or certified arborist climbing harnesses when tackling elevated tree work. Assess the tension and directional fall path of heavy limbs beforehand, as an unsecured ladder offers almost no defense against the reactive forces of shifting branch movement. On an elevated timber deck, a crane lifts a bundle of logs. The load shifts out of alignment during the lift. Workers should remain off unsecured, bundled materials during an active hoisting operation. The unpredictable movement of cylindrical logs under tension quickly weakens the stability of the load, turning a routine lift into a major load control concern that can place anyone standing on it in an unprotected position near the active work area. Always keep your feet firmly planted on solid, engineered decking and step completely clear of the load before signaling the crane operator. A bundled load should not be used as a temporary work platform. Once those materials become loose, the safe exit path can become limited quickly. At a muddy construction site, a worker pries a stubborn plank from a narrow foundation wall, and the material shifts unexpectedly during the task. Workers must not use body weight and legs as a makeshift pry bar to dislodge formwork or structural materials. When forceful, unsupported leverage is applied with the lower body, an unexpected break or shift in the material can quickly take away the worker's center of gravity, turning an unsafe shortcut into an avoidable elevated position concern. Always use the proper removal tools to separate materials while maintaining a secure, two-footed stance on solid ground. Keep yourself completely outside the active work area and remember that physical shortcuts always increase your exposure. In a scrapyard, the use of a long-handled striking tool becomes difficult to control when clearance is misjudged. The operator's legs should remain completely outside the active toolpath when using a long-handled striking tool on hard, unyielding materials. Contacting a metal edge with excessive uncontrolled momentum can cause off-center contact or sudden deflection that redirects the tool's weight toward the operator's stance area. Always establish a secure, wide stance that keeps the legs completely clear of the tool's downward path and potential deflection area. Controlled, targeted contacts should be used instead of relying on sheer force. In an outdoor equipment yard, inflating a heavy machinery tire becomes an important safety example when the stored air pressure unexpectedly releases. Overinflating compromised industrial tires without a protective barrier transforms stored air pressure into a rapid pressure release concern, capable of creating a significant equipment control and impact zone hazard upon sudden structural failure. Workers must always utilize a reinforced tire inflation cage and a long extension hose with an inline gauge. Standing directly over the sidewall during inflation creates direct exposure to the primary pressure release zone. At a storefront delivery area, a worker sits atop a storage drum as the thin plastic lid begins to take on the weight it was never built to hold. A container lid may look solid, but it is usually designed to seal contents, not support a person. Plastic covers can flex, crack, or collapse suddenly when downward pressure goes beyond their safe limit. Once the surface gives way, balance can be lost immediately, especially when the container is open, unstable, or positioned inside an active work area. Workers should only use proper chairs, benches, or designated seating areas during breaks. Facility managers should clearly mark fragile containers and keep storage drums away from rest areas or walkways. A loaded trailer can continue rolling under its own momentum, while a pickup truck that begins reversing without full control can rapidly reduce the available clearance behind it. In such environments, visibility and reaction time are limited, making it difficult for either the driver or nearby workers to respond in time. Personnel should immediately move clear of any rolling equipment and avoid attempting to stop it manually. Vehicles should only be operated once full control and visibility are confirmed, with drivers using mirrors, cameras, or spotters when operating in tight residential or mixed-use yards. In an outdoor staging area, a forklift carries a heavy slab on an extended boom. The load shifts, and the machine becomes overloaded at the front. Forklift lifting limits change the moment a boom, jib, or similar attachment is added to the machine. Using an extended boom pushes the center of gravity far beyond the wheelbase, instantly reducing rear stability and turning the entire machine into a severely reduced stability lifting condition. Always recalculate your machine's safe lifting capacity when adding any boom, jib, or lifting attachment. Never extend a heavy load away from the mast. Keep it low and tight to the machine to maintain full control and balance. At this masonry site, a worker stands on a makeshift scaffold while a coworker climbs onto the frame. The extra movement suddenly makes the whole structure unstable. Work only from properly built and anchored scaffolding, and keep temporary support frames clear of additional climbing while someone is already positioned above. Improvised platforms may seem functional for a moment, but they lack the stability needed to safely support shifting weight and movement. Supervisors should require engineered scaffolding that is level, braced, and anchored before elevated work begins. Workers should access platforms only through designated points, not by climbing the structure itself. The problem with unstable scaffolding is that it often appears safe right up until the moment it loses support. In an outdoor parking lot, a forklift reverses without confirming the path toward a solid concrete water basin directly behind it. Operators must not operate a forklift in reverse without a guaranteed unobstructed line of sight and total awareness of the operating environment. When you back up without checking over your shoulder or verifying your clearances, you turn a large industrial vehicle into a meaningful clearance concern that can affect infrastructure and compromise the safety of the surrounding work area. Your eyes must be locked in the exact direction of travel before your foot ever hits the accelerator, so you can accurately map out stationary hazards and barriers before beginning any material handling task. In an industrial storage yard, hot work activity takes place near wrapped materials, creating a heat exposure hazard for nearby heat-sensitive materials. Hot work or heat-producing cutting tools should only be used near heat-sensitive materials when proper protective shielding and clearance controls are already in place. Allowing heated metal particles to contact nearby packaging creates a heat exposure hazard that can develop quickly and become difficult for on-site teams to manage. Always establish a strict 35-foot clearance zone around any hot work area, removing or completely covering all heat-sensitive materials with certified protective blankets before cutting begins. A dedicated safety spotter equipped with the correct fire safety equipment should also be assigned, ensuring someone is actively monitoring where hot work byproducts travel to help prevent a secondary site hazard. At a produce market, a man stands behind a flatbed truck just as a heavy wooden pallet loses balance and moves backward into the area where he is standing. Standing directly in the movement path of an unsecured truckload introduces an immediate and major impact path concern. The sudden shift of heavy cargo quickly transforms stacked materials into a significant object stability risk. Gravity accelerates this weight without warning, creating immediate exposure for anyone standing below and leaving limited time to safely move clear. On a flat industrial site, a dump truck raises its hydraulic bed to unload dirt as the elevated steel carriage begins shifting off balance. A dump truck can lose stability even when the ground appears level. As the bed rises, the load moves higher and the truck's center of weight becomes easier to disturb. Uneven soil, shifting dirt, soft ground, tire pressure differences, or material stuck in the bed can pull the raised structure sideways. Operators should place the truck on firm, compacted, level ground before lifting the bed. Tire pressure should be checked across all axles to keep support even. If the truck begins leaning during unloading, the movement should stop and the hydraulics should be lowered under control immediately. In a busy warehouse aisle, a worker stands beside an active forklift, unaware that the raised load is not fully stable. Standing within the lifting area of a raised forklift load places the work position in the same movement area as materials that can shift without warning. Forklift tines are designed to lift and carry freight, but the load still depends on balance, friction, and proper placement. If the freight moves on the tines, slides forward, or loses its stable position, gravity takes over immediately. Even a brief stop, turn, or uneven floor surface can cause raised materials to drop out of the controlled lifting position. Personnel should remain outside the forklift's operating footprint until the load is fully lowered, stable, and confirmed safe to approach. In a busy yard, two forklifts move toward each other with blocked forward views. Neither operator has a clear visual of the other's path. Clear sight lines are a basic operating requirement whenever a forklift moves through an active yard. Forcing a heavy industrial vehicle forward with an obstructed line of sight creates a serious moving blind spot increasing the likelihood of unsafe contact with pedestrians, structures, and other equipment. Always drive in reverse when transporting a load that blocks your forward vision, keeping your eyes fixed strictly on your path of travel. Enforce clear traffic management protocols and utilize trained spotters when navigating congested yards with oversized materials. On a sloped construction site, a cement mixer sits on a low traction incline. Moments later, it begins moving backwards down the slope. Parking substantial liquid-loaded machinery on a steep grade should not depend solely on internal parking brakes. The dynamic, shifting weight of a spinning concrete mixer can easily exceed the brake's holding ability, quickly allowing a temporarily parked truck to move unexpectedly and create clear safety concerns. Always deploy heavy-duty wheel chocks and verify ground stability before beginning any downhill pouring operation. Keep yourself completely outside the travel path of a substantial vehicle. When the truck begins moving unexpectedly, a large moving vehicle becomes difficult to control safely. At a warehouse bay, a reversing car and a loaded forklift enter the same blind threshold at the same time, creating a preventable shared path concern. Driving a loaded forklift through blind corners and shared thresholds without stopping turns a vital piece of equipment into a meaningful vehicle clearance concern. When operators fail to sound their horn and verify clear passage at intersections, they create an avoidable path control concern that can affect vehicles, property, and any pedestrians positioned within the blind spot. At a sand excavation site, an excavator tracks too close to the edge of an unsupported embankment. Heavy machinery should be kept away from the unsupported edge of an excavation or sand pit unless a strictly calculated setback distance has been established and maintained. The substantial concentrated weight of an excavator's tracks can quickly compromise the shear strength of loose soil, leading to an unexpected edge instability condition. Strictly enforce a 1-to-1 setback rule, keeping the equipment at least 1 foot away from the edge for every foot of the drop-off's depth. A trained ground spotter should also continuously monitor the terrain for tension cracks and shifting earth, ensuring the machine stays firmly on compacted ground well outside the exclusion zone. Inside a busy printing facility, a routine inspection highlights a major workplace hazard when an industrial press unexpectedly activates while a worker is still inside the operating area. Reaching into the operating area of an industrial press without proper lockout procedures exposes workers to sudden, significant contact point concerns. An unexpected automated cycle delivers substantial mechanical force quickly, leaving little opportunity to move clear. Power must be completely isolated and physically locked out before inspecting internal components. Relying on an idle machine to remain stationary is a high-risk assumption. Operators must always engage mechanical safety blocks to physically prevent heavy components from descending during maintenance. Inside an open garage, a worker steps between a tractor and a raised cargo bed while the heavy steel structure remains held above the chassis. A raised cargo bed should not be treated as secure just because the hydraulics are holding it in place. Pressure, hinges, pins, and mechanical parts can lose support without giving a clear warning first. If that support drops away, gravity takes over quickly, and the remaining clearance near the chassis can disappear with very little time to move clear. Workers should install heavy-duty support props before entering beneath any raised mechanical structure. Crews should not rely only on hydraulic pressure to hold equipment overhead. At a construction site, a mason works from an extension ladder, unaware that the unanchored base can slide away on the smooth concrete floor. A ladder placed on smooth concrete depends heavily on friction at the feet and a proper angle against the wall. As the worker climbs or shifts weight, the ladder feet can begin sliding outward if they are not anchored, blocked, or held by a trained spotter. Once that base movement begins, the ladder no longer supports the work position in a controlled way. Workers should anchor ladder feet, use slip-resistant bases, or assign trained ground spotters when working on smooth surfaces. In a fabrication yard, a worker stands near suspended steel pipes as a crane takes up slack. An overhead hoist component lowers farther than expected. The tensioning phase of a lift should always be treated as an overhead exclusion period for everyone on the ground. A lifting system malfunction within the assembly can quickly displace heavy steel components from the overhead system, transforming the immediate footprint of the crane into a serious overhead contact hazard. Always step far back and establish a clear safety perimeter before signaling an operator to apply tension to the load. Never stand directly beneath a hoist block or boom assembly during the initial lift. In a loading yard, a truck carrying a forklift pulls away with its rear door left open. The unsecured forklift then rolls off the truck. Wheeled industrial equipment should only be transported inside a vehicle when heavy-duty load-rated tie-downs are used to completely immobilize the machine. Relying solely on a forklift's parking brake against the strong movement forces of a moving truck allows heavy equipment to shift during transport, creating equipment damage concerns and broader safety concerns. Always secure mobile machinery using a proper 4-point tie-down system before transport begins. Cargo doors should remain fully closed while in motion, and a machine's internal braking system should not be treated as the main method for controlling movement and inertia during transit. Inside an excavation trench, a pressurized water line discharges unexpectedly and sends water through the confined work area. Workers must not attempt to adjust, repair, or dismantle a pressurized utility line without confirming the system is completely depressurized and securely locked out. When the structural integrity of an active water main is compromised, a controlled utility can become a pressurized water release concern that may create rapid water entry and reduce safe access inside the work area. You must always verify that all pressure has been safely bled from the system and double-check lockout procedures before beginning any hands-on repairs. Every worker in a deep excavation must have a designated, unobstructed exit route mapped out in case of rapid water entry or changing ground support conditions. At a canal recovery site, a crane setup shows stability concerns as the machine's balance shifts toward the waterline. A mobile crane's load capacity chart must be followed carefully when booming out over a steep, unsupported drop-off. Attempting to lift a heavy, waterlogged load at an extended radius can push the equipment beyond its stability limit, reduce outrigger effectiveness, and create serious equipment instability hazards before the operator can correct the setup. Always calculate the exact weight of the load, including any trapped water, and rigidly adhere to the manufacturer's maximum radius limits for the lift. Outriggers must be fully deployed on solid level ground with proper cribbing placed well back from the shear edge to ensure the machine remains completely stabilized throughout the entire operation. Inside an auto shop, a worker polishing a sedan reacts immediately as the heavy steel hood unexpectedly closes. Relying on worn hydraulic struts to support a heavy automotive hood introduces a major contact point concern. A sudden mechanical failure quickly eliminates crucial structural support, transforming the elevated panel into a fast-moving, unsupported weight that can place any hands resting on the engine bay perimeter inside a contact zone. Technicians must always verify that all hood support mechanisms are locked before extending limbs into the contact zone. Utilizing an external prop rod provides a vital mechanical backup to prevent sudden closures. Inside a busy warehouse, a forklift enters a transport trailer just as the truck begins pulling away from the loading dock. A trailer must stay locked in place for the entire time a forklift is working inside it. If the truck moves unexpectedly, the bridge between the trailer and the dock can vanish in seconds. That sudden separation removes stable support from the dock transition and turns the trailer opening into a serious edge and drop-off risk for the equipment. Facilities should enforce wheel chocks, dock locks, and trailer restraint procedures before loading begins. Drivers must follow site rules that prevent vehicle movement until the task is complete. Dock workers, drivers, and forklift operators need clear communication before any truck moves away again. In a residential yard, a worker balances on an extension ladder while using a powered cutting tool, unaware that the branch being cut is part of the ladder's support. Using a ladder against a tree or branch being cut creates an unstable setup because the support point can disappear during the task. Once the branch is cut through, the ladder may lose the surface holding it in place. The ladder load, tool movement, and shifting timber can all change the ladder's balance at the same time. Cutting work at height must be supported by independent anchors, not by the same material being removed. Arborists should use secured climbing systems, proper harnesses, and independent anchor points for elevated tree work. At a bridge construction site, a crawler crane lifts a heavy, concrete span when the setup becomes unstable under the load. Operators must not attempt a critical heavy tonnage lift without rigorously verifying the crane's load capacity, ground stability, and rigging balance. When a machine is operated outside verified lift conditions or dynamic load shifts are not fully accounted for, a large piece of heavy equipment can become an equipment stability concern that may affect infrastructure and the surrounding controlled work zone. Every critical lift requires a meticulously calculated lift plan that accounts for exact load weights, boom angles, and ground-bearing pressure before the load ever leaves the earth. Operators must constantly monitor their load moment indicators and immediately stop the operation if the machinery shows any sign of instability. Outside a storefront, a long metal bar is being positioned overhead, but one end is barely supported. The entire thing is basically depending on friction to stay in place. Simple friction should not be used to support the opposite end of a heavy structural load while work is taking place at elevation. Leaving one side of a long metal bar unsecured against an unstable surface contact point creates an unreliable pivot condition, producing an overhead material control hazard the moment the material loses stable support. Always fully secure both ends of heavy materials using mechanical clamps. On a high-rise construction site, a worker accidentally places weight on an unsupported metal beam, creating a dangerous lever effect near the open edge. Stepping onto unanchored materials overhanging a drop creates an immediate pivot point that can fail under body weight. Gravity turns the rail into a seesaw effect, shifting suddenly beneath the worker the second their mass crosses the fulcrum. This loss of foundational integrity leaves limited reaction time, transforming a solid-looking surface into an unstable platform that creates a sudden fall prevention concern near the edge. Personnel must always verify structural support before applying their physical weight near leading edges. Inside a crowded retail store, a worker pulls a heavy plant cart onto a descending escalator as the moving steps begin taking control of the load. A passenger escalator is not built to control heavy rolling freight. When the cart's front wheels drop onto moving steps, the weight shifts forward and the load begins following the slope. The steep angle, rolling frame, and downward motion can quickly overpower manual control, especially when the cart is tall, heavy, or unevenly balanced. Workers should use freight elevators when moving wheeled inventory between floors. Rolling carts, plant racks, and loaded cages should stay off passenger escalators. If a load is too heavy to control safely, the task should stop. In a transport yard, a worker reverses a forklift onto a flatbed trailer, unaware that the unsecured deck can shift under the machine's weight. Moving heavy equipment between vehicles requires a properly secured and stable loading surface. As a forklift moves onto a flatbed, its weight shifts the trailer's balance and loads the suspension. If the trailer isn't anchored or docked correctly, the deck can tilt or shift out of position. Personnel should use secured loading docks, rated ramps, wheel chocks, and dock plates for equipment transfers. Drivers must verify that transport beds are anchored and stable before loading. On a logging site, a cutting operation releases stored tension in a leaning tree trunk, causing the timber to move with substantial stored energy force. Workers must not position themselves on the release side of a tension load, especially when cutting tension timber or managing bound trees. When a trunk carrying substantial stored energy is cut without understanding the release physics, the timber can become a stored energy concern that may move unpredictably within the release zone. Always conduct a thorough tension and compression analysis of the wood before making a single cut. If a tree is under heavy tension, utilize mechanical equipment like the grapple truck already present on this site to fully stabilize the load and relieve the pressure before a worker ever engages the saw. Above an eroding riverbank, a utility pole operation becomes unsafe as the ground loses reliable support. Municipal utility poles should only be approached, climbed, or worked on by certified utility professionals, especially when they are anchored in shifting or visibly unstable soil. The added weight and movement of a person on the structure can lead to support loss in an already compromised foundation, turning an unauthorized repair attempt into a major work-at-height hazard. Infrastructure repairs must be left entirely to certified utility companies, ensuring that utility line work and structural stabilization are only handled by professionals equipped with proper rigging and insulated aerial lifts. At a curbside delivery zone, a high-risk attempt to maneuver an oversized pallet off a truck's liftgate becomes an important safety example when the cargo unexpectedly tips. Pushing an unbalanced, top-heavy load beyond the structural edge of a hydraulic liftgate creates an immediate, uncontrolled shift in its center of gravity. This improper miscalculation allows the physical weight to exceed the worker's control capacity, transforming the freight into a significant load stability concern that creates an important load control zone. Utilizing a properly rated forklift or designated loading dock is absolutely necessary for managing oversized deliveries. Attempting to manually balance shifting weight over an open ledge is a high-risk choice that can quickly lead to loss of load control. Inside an industrial facility, a worker stands in a truck bed while a suspended steel frame begins moving downward into the tight loading space. A steel frame carries stored energy the entire time it hangs from crane rigging. If a strap slips, a hook shifts, or the lift loses balance, the material can suddenly move into the loading area. In a confined truck bed, there may be very little open space to step away once the load starts moving out of position. Facility managers should keep personnel clear of loading areas while materials remain overhead. Rigging equipment, lift points, chains, and straps need inspection before every hoist. On a residential backyard deck, a homeowner steps onto a loose decking board, unaware that the unsecured plank can flip upward like a lever. Unfastened deck boards can shift suddenly when weight is applied. If not properly secured to joists, they can pivot, causing one side to lift as the other is pressed down. Even a finished-looking surface can behave unpredictably if it isn't fixed to the frame. Builders should fasten decking materials immediately after placing them so the surface remains stable under foot traffic. Personnel should check unfinished platforms before stepping onto them, especially when boards are loose, overhanging, or not fully attached. During a routine transport task, a hand truck meets a towering stack of unsecured beverage crates, and the stack begins to lose stability. Workers must not attempt to manually transport freestanding, unsecured stacks of heavy materials that exceed their physical control limits or the safe operating capacity of the equipment. When tall loads are not shrink-wrapped, banded, or properly secured before tilting, a simple material handling task can become a meaningful tipping concern that may affect surrounding materials, impact shipments, and place anyone in the active handling zone within the affected area. You must always secure tall stacks of crates with wrapping or heavy banding before attempting to tilt or move them with a hand truck. Limit the height of your loads to a manageable center of gravity so that the weight remains entirely within the operator's physical control. At an industrial processing facility, a worker uses a narrow, wet ledge beside an open processing vat as a walkway. The slippery surface creates a serious slip risk hazard. The narrow, unguarded concrete lips of open vats should not be used as walkways or bridges, especially in wet and slippery conditions. Balancing over unsecured floor-level processing tanks eliminates any margin for error, turning a minor loss of footing into a risk of moving into the tank area or coming too close to processed materials. Always install physical guardrails, heavy-duty safety grates, or raised curbs around open vats to establish a definitive physical barrier against accidental entry. At a busy supply yard, a cargo truck unexpectedly accelerates forward while a worker stands atop the load, causing him and heavy panels to shift. Operating a transport vehicle while personnel are actively positioned on the elevated freight creates a major, immediate fall prevention concern. The sudden forward momentum quickly disrupts a worker's footing, transforming the unsecured cargo into a sliding surface that moves them rapidly toward the ground alongside unstable moving materials. Drivers must establish absolute visual confirmation with all loading personnel before engaging the vehicle's transmission. Workers should only secure or unbind freight while standing safely on the ground, utilizing proper extension tools. Implementing a mandatory verbal clearance protocol ensures no machinery moves until everyone is entirely clear of the truck. At an industrial chemical facility, two workers weld on top of a large storage tank while unseen vapors may still remain trapped inside. Hot work on a sealed tank requires full control of the atmosphere inside the vessel before the first spark. Welding heat can travel through steel and reach vapors that are not visible from outside. Without testing, cleaning, venting, and purging, pressure can build rapidly inside the container and create a dangerous release risk. Facilities should require gas clearance testing before hot work begins on tanks or industrial vessels. Crews should purge enclosed containers with approved ventilation or inert gas systems before welding starts. Permits should only be issued after the atmosphere is tested, documented, and confirmed safe by trained personnel. At a construction site, a laborer swings a hand demolition tool from a narrow scaffold, unaware that loosened masonry can move into the frame. Working from temporary scaffolding during demolition requires a strong separation between the worker platform and the material being broken. As brickwork comes loose, moving masonry can contact the scaffold structure and affect its stability. The platform may also shake, shift, or lose support if heavy material lands against the frame. Foremen should keep active demolition areas clear of temporary support structures whenever loosened material could contact the scaffold. On a lift site, a forklift raises a large container while a worker is positioned on top, creating an elevated work concern that should be stopped immediately. Operators must not allow personnel to stand on forklift lifting components, elevated pallets, or hoisted materials under any circumstances. When industrial lifting equipment is treated like a personnel lifting device, and a person is placed on an unsecured load, the operation creates an elevated work and clearance concern. A load shift, wind movement, or equipment movement can quickly affect balance, turning a routine lift into an unsafe elevated work setup that should be stopped immediately. Forklifts are engineered exclusively for moving materials, not people. If a worker needs to access an elevated area, you must use a certified aerial work platform, a scissor lift, or proper scaffolding equipped with approved elevated work protection. On a rooftop renovation, a large metal roofing panel shifts while being handled near an unguarded edge. Large, cumbersome construction materials should only be handled near an unprotected roof edge when workers are securely tied off to an engineered anchor point. The unpredictable weight distribution of a long metal sheet can easily exceed a worker's ability to maintain balance, turning a simple loss of grip into a balance issue before the worker can regain stability. Install temporary guardrails or a warning line to separate the staging area from the roof edge. Enforce fall protection for all perimeter work, so workers remain safely supported if materials shift. At a roadside utility pole, a maintenance check turns into a serious safety concern when a worker on an extension ladder gets too close to an energized line. Working near energized lines without proper de-energization creates a serious electrical proximity and contact hazard. Contact or unsafe proximity can cause sudden loss of muscle control that interrupts a worker's grip and immediately creates an uncontrolled fall prevention risk. Technicians must strictly verify that all power grids are completely isolated and locked out before initiating elevated repairs. Utilizing fiberglass ladders provides a crucial layer of non-conductive protection against electrical proximity hazards. Outside a busy storefront, a worker pulls hard on a folding gate as weakened hinges begin losing control of the metal panels. A heavy folding gate depends on its hinges, brackets, rollers, and guide points to keep weight moving safely. If those connections are damaged or loose, pulling harder can make the structure shift suddenly instead of opening smoothly. Once the gate loses support, gravity can swing the panels into the operator's path with very little warning. Facility managers should inspect commercial gate hinges, brackets, rollers, and anchors on a regular schedule. Workers should stop using any gate that feels jammed, unstable, misaligned, or difficult to move. In a busy yard, a delivery tricycle travels across a smooth paved area, unaware that the path ahead ends abruptly at a ramp edge. When a moving vehicle transitions from a flat surface to an unexpected drop or ramp edge, the front wheel can lose smooth contact instantly. This sudden change interrupts forward motion and can destabilize steering, especially for lightweight utility vehicles. Even low-speed movement can become hazardous when surface continuity is broken without warning. Operators should always confirm surface changes ahead, especially near ramps, edges, or loading transitions. In an open railway yard, a worker using a cutting torch severs a track, unaware that the tensioned steel is about to move upward. Cutting metal components under structural stress quickly releases stored kinetic energy. This unseen tension acts like a coiled spring, transforming heavy steel into a fast-moving movement path concerned the moment its integrity is compromised by the torch. Operating without securing the material creates a stored energy movement risk. Personnel must always assess load tension before initiating any cut. Utilizing heavy machinery or industrial clamps to stabilize the rail is absolutely required to prevent unexpected movement. Furthermore, workers must always stand completely out of the potential movement path zone. At an excavation site, a worker stands on the tracks of an active excavator as the rotating cab begins moving. Excavator tracks may look like a convenient place to stand, but they are not a safe work platform. When the upper structure rotates, the steel body changes position quickly and can remove a stable footing from anyone on the machine. Near an open excavation, that movement adds risk because the ground edge and machine motion are active together. Workers should stay on stable ground and remain clear of the excavator's swing path. Operators should lock the rotation and secure the machine before anyone approaches. At a marble factory, a worker lifts one stone slab with a crane hook, unaware that the slab behind it may no longer have enough support. Vertical slab storage depends on every piece being properly leaned, separated, and secured. When the front slab is lifted away, it may remove the pressure that was helping hold the slab behind it in place. If that rear slab is not independently clamped or supported, its weight can begin moving forward. Facilities should use engineered racks with independent clamps or restraints for all heavy slab inventory. Personnel must keep a wide buffer during active material transfers and avoid working in the forward movement path of unsecured stone or sheet materials. At a busy loading dock, a forklift offloads a towering pallet, but the heavy, unsecured cargo unexpectedly loses stability and moves down into the load path. Lifting top-heavy, unbanded cargo introduces a major balance concern. As the heavy machinery maneuvers backward, the shifting weight drastically alters the center of gravity. This sudden off-balance momentum overwhelms the lift capacity, transforming the towering materials into an uncontrolled load stability concern that can affect anything in its direct path. Operators must consistently secure large pallets with heavy-duty stretch wrap before initiating any movement. Confirming absolute load balance is strictly essential to prevent sudden shifting. At a fueling station, a worker reaches toward an uncontrolled rolling truck as the heavy vehicle moves closer to the concrete pump island. A moving truck carries far more momentum than a person can control by hand. Even at low speed, the weight of the vehicle can keep it rolling toward nearby pumps, structures, or parked equipment. Trying to stop it physically places the worker between moving steel and fixed objects, where the available space can close almost immediately. Personnel should move clear of uncontrolled rolling machinery and alert others nearby. Protecting personal safety should come before preventing equipment damage. Drivers should set parking brakes, use wheel chocks, and confirm the vehicle is fully secured before leaving the cab area. At a rural construction site, a worker tries to steady a shaking cement mixer, unaware that the machine's movement is already beyond safe manual control. A vibrating mixer can generate strong, irregular movement when it is not properly anchored or when the internal load is unbalanced. Once the frame begins shaking, direct hand contact does not provide enough control to stabilize the machine safely. Instead of trying to hold the equipment still, the safe response is to stop power and correct the cause from a controlled position. Construction crews should secure portable mixers on solid, level ground before starting the motor. Operators must shut the machine down during severe vibration, check the load balance, and restart only after the equipment is stable. Inside a busy metalworking factory, a split-second miscalculation becomes an important safety example when an industrial press unexpectedly activates downward. Bypassing safety guards to manually adjust materials inside an active stamping zone creates an immediate major hand safety concern. The heavy hydraulic force of an industrial press operates with unyielding speed, leaving limited reaction time to move away once the downward stroke begins. This transforms the work area into a high-risk contact point zone. Operators must constantly utilize extended handling tools to place and remove materials, keeping hands entirely outside the press operating area. At a residential construction site, 2 workers carry a tall mobile scaffold across muddy ground as the elevated frame begins to lose its balance. A tall scaffold can become unstable when it is lifted and carried across uneven terrain. Once the base is off the ground, the structure depends entirely on the worker's grip, footing, and coordinated movement. Mud, ruts, and soft ground can cause one person to slip, slow down, or step unevenly, shifting the scaffold's weight sideways and pulling the frame out of control. Crews should dismantle tall scaffold structures before relocating them across unfinished terrain. Scaffold sections should be moved in smaller, manageable pieces using planned routes and clear communication. At a factory, personnel stand near an uncentered crane load, unaware that the first lift can send the steel swinging sideways. A crane load must be lifted from directly above its center of gravity to prevent sideways movement at the start of the lift. If the hook is not plumb over the load, the tension will pull the material toward the point where the crane line wants to balance. Steel that appears still before the lift can become an uncontrolled suspended load once the crane begins applying upward force. Riggers must align crane hooks directly over the center of balance before applying tension. Personnel should keep a wide clearance around initial hoisting operations and use tag lines or controlled guidance methods instead of standing close to the load. At a high-rise construction site, the towering silhouette of a large industrial tower, crane unexpectedly loses stability and moves outward from its base. Operating a top-heavy crane with a compromised structural foundation introduces a major tipping concern. Once the center of gravity shifts beyond the engineered base limits, the heavy steel framework can suffer a rapid loss of support, transforming large machinery into an uncontrolled equipment instability concern. Site managers must strictly halt all lifting operations when winds exceed safety thresholds. Inside a commercial kitchen, a worker moves a loaded pizza rack as the tall, uneven frame begins leaning sideways. A rolling rack becomes unstable when too much weight sits high on a narrow frame. Even a small turn, push, or side shift can move the load off balance if the shelving is unevenly stacked. Once the center of weight moves past the wheelbase, the rack can continue tipping faster than the operator can regain control. Workers should load rolling shelves from the bottom upward to keep the base stable. Operators should move racks slowly with both hands on the frame and avoid sharp turns or sudden side pulls. At a dark loading depot, a worker is positioned in the rear clearance area of a large transport truck, unaware that the reversing vehicle is moving through a blind spot. The rear of a large truck can hide workers from the driver's mirrors, especially in dark yards, tight depots, or busy loading areas. Once the vehicle begins reversing, the space behind it can be reduced quickly, and the driver may not realize the rear path is not clear. Reversing operations must be controlled through spotters, lighting, cameras, and clear communication before the vehicle moves. Personnel must stay visible to operators, avoid rear clearance areas around active vehicles, and maintain eye contact or radio communication during yard operations. While pulling a large air conditioner across the floor, an unsecured door swings open, shifting its weight and causing the equipment to tip sideways. Transporting top-heavy equipment with unsecured access panels introduces an unpredictable shift in the center of gravity. This sudden off-balance momentum allows the physical tonnage to exceed the control limits of a pallet jack, transforming moving machinery into a major clearance zone concern. A person cannot safely act as a structural brace against shifting industrial equipment. Personnel must tightly strap down all movable components before initiating transport to maintain absolute stability. If a large load begins tipping, operators must immediately step back, clear the load path, and allow the load to settle without attempting to catch it. On a busy highway shoulder, a tow truck operator works beside the flatbed while passing traffic moves close to the roadside work area. Roadside recovery work leaves little margin when traffic is moving at highway speed. A small steering drift, distraction, or late lane change can bring a passing vehicle too close to the work area. Because the speed difference is high, tow operators need protective spacing, clear visibility, and positioning that keeps the recovery vehicle between them and lanes when possible. Tow operators should set buffers with cones, flares, lights, or advance markers placed far upstream. Personnel should work from the protected side of the recovery vehicle when possible. At a residential porch, a rider hits the accelerator while reversing an ATV, unaware that the incline can shift the machine backward out of control. Applying sudden throttle on an incline can quickly change the balance of a small vehicle. When the rear wheels receive power while the all-terrain vehicle is angled upward, the machine's center of gravity can move behind the contact point of the tires. The machine's balance can shift upward at the front before the rider has time to correct the motion. Operators should use steady throttle control when moving ATVs around steps, ramps, or raised surfaces. On a rugged construction site, a heavy tractor maneuvers a large concrete mixer, unaware that uneven ground will suddenly force the top-heavy machinery to tip over. Towing tall industrial equipment across uncompacted earth introduces a significant stability concern. As the narrow wheelbase navigates unstable debris, the weight of the mixing drum dramatically shifts. This unpredictable momentum overpowers the towing hitch, transforming the trailer into an uncontrolled force that risks pulling the connected vehicle off balance. Operators must strictly survey and clear travel paths of severe ruts before relocating heavy machinery. Utilizing specialized transport for these units is vastly superior to high-risk towing across treacherous sites. At a rocky extraction site, a mobile crane hoists an excavator up a cliff as the machine begins lifting off balance. A crane lift becomes harder to control when the boom stretches far outward under a heavy load. The farther the load moves from the crane's center, the more leverage it applies against the counterweight and outriggers. If the boom angle, ground support, or load weight is misjudged, the crane can start losing stability and the cab can begin lifting from the surface. Operators should verify the load chart against the exact boom angle, radius, and equipment weight. Outriggers must be fully deployed on firm ground with support under each pad. At an agricultural transmission site, a utility crew balances on a suspended high-tension cable, unaware that a sudden loss of tension can make the line move unpredictably. High-tension cables store a large amount of mechanical energy when they are stretched and suspended. If tension changes suddenly, the cable can recoil, drop, or swing as stored energy releases in a direction that is difficult to predict from the work position. Anyone standing or balancing on the line depends completely on that tension remaining stable. Utility crews should use dual-anchored harnesses connected to independent lifelines during aerial work. Supervisors must monitor cable tension, anchor points, and rigging stability before workers access suspended lines or elevated cable systems. In a resort courtyard, a worker using a long metal pole outdoors raises the extended tool, unknowingly making contact with an overhead energized line. Raising conductive materials near overhead electrical grids creates an invisible, serious electrical proximity zone. An iron pole can act as a direct conduit, bridging the physical gap between energized electrical equipment and the grounded worker. This sudden electrical contact hazard requires strict prevention because reaction time is extremely limited. Personnel must constantly scan the airspace before maneuvering any extended equipment outdoors. Utilizing strictly non-conductive fiberglass tools is absolutely essential when overhead electrical hazards exist nearby. Employers must actively enforce safe minimum approach distances around all energized power infrastructure to permanently prevent accidental contact. Inside an industrial yard, a worker connects a heavy steel plate to an overhead crane while the rigging alignment begins pulling unevenly. A steel plate needs balanced rigging before it is lifted clear of the ground. If hooks, chains, or tension lines are not aligned correctly, the load can twist, tilt, or shift as the crane takes on weight. Even a small movement can place stress on the lifting points and cause the suspended material to move out of its intended path. Riggers should inspect hooks, chains, shackles, lift points, and tension lines before every lift. Workers should stay clear of the suspended material and avoid the load path. The crane should lift slowly so the crew can confirm the plate remains level and secure. On a residential street, a worker pushes a loaded pallet jack toward a truck ramp, unaware that the edge transition can stop the wheels while the cargo keeps moving. A loaded pallet jack needs a smooth transition when moving from street level to a ramp or truck platform. If the small front wheels catch on a raised edge, the bottom of the load stops suddenly while the taller freight continues forward. That quick change in motion can push the center of gravity beyond the base of support. Operators should use lift gates, dock plates, or power-assisted equipment when moving heavy inventory from street level into trucks. Tall freight should be strapped, stabilized, and moved slowly so the load stays balanced through ramps, edges, and surface changes. At an active construction yard, a mobile crane lifting heavy metal rods suddenly loses balance, sending its rear wheels upward before the entire machine tips over. Hoisting dense bundles of steel without deploying stabilizing outriggers introduces a significant tipping concern. As the suspended load extends outward, it aggressively shifts the machine's center of gravity past the front axle. This severe imbalance quickly overcomes the rear counterweight, transforming the equipment into an uncontrolled lever that forces the cab toward the ground. Operators must strictly calculate exact payload limits against the authorized lift chart before initiating any hoist. At a highway intersection, a large transport tank contacts an elevated boom truck and transfers force into the raised bucket platform. An aerial bucket becomes vulnerable when oversized transport equipment moves through the same clearance path. If a heavy vehicle or tall load strikes the boom, the force can travel through the raised structure and disturb the platform immediately. Because the worker's position is elevated, even brief contact can create a serious stability problem with very little time for safe correction. Transport crews should verify height, width, and turning clearance before oversized machinery moves through active intersections. In a busy warehouse aisle, a worker walks quickly through the area, unaware that an abandoned pallet jack is resting directly in the walkway. Manual pallet jacks are low to the ground and can be difficult to notice in active walkways, especially when the forks blend into the floor. A worker moving through the aisle may not see the steel frame until the footpath is already blocked. The sudden stop can interrupt normal walking balance and create an uncontrolled movement in the aisle. Walkways must stay clear because even stationary equipment can create a serious obstruction when left in the wrong place. Personnel should park manual lifting equipment in designated staging areas immediately after use. To keep learning from these important workplace safety lessons, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay aware, stay safe.